Explainer. Today, we're cracking open one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, controversial parts of the Indian Constitution. We're talking about the emergency provisions. You can think of it as the ultimate constitutional break glass in case of emergency button for the entire nation.
But let's start with a really big question, one that every single country has to figure out. What happens when its very existence is on the line? From war, total internal collapse, or even financial ruin. How does a democratic constitution actually prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario?
Well, the Indian Constitution's answer is this powerful set of tools we call the emergency provisions. Now, these grant the central government some pretty immense power, essentially shifting the whole balance of our federal democracy, all in the name of safeguarding the nation itself.
But this constitutional toolkit isn't just one big red button. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It actually contains three very distinct powers, and each one is designed for a very specific type of crisis. So, let's break them down.
Okay, first up, we've got the national emergency under Article 352. You got to think of this as the nuclear option. It's only for the absolute gravest of threats, like a full-blown war or an armed rebellion. And for good reason, it's the only one that's officially called a proclamation of emergency in the Constitution itself. Next up is something you've probably heard of, President's Rule, or a state emergency, under Article 356. This comes into play when a specific state's government just can't function according to the Constitution anymore. It allows the central government to basically step in and take the wheel for a while. And finally, we have the financial emergency under Article 360. This power is designed to be a last resort if the country's entire financial stability or its credit is in serious jeopardy. Okay, so how do these three powers actually work? And what really makes them so different from each other? Well, as they say, the devil is in the details. And those details are all about their approval, how long they last, and the impact they have. Right off the bat, a huge difference is the kind of political agreement you need. To declare a national emergency, you need a special majority in Parliament. That's a super high bar, a 2/3 vote. But for President's Rule or a financial emergency, you only need a simple majority. That makes them way easier to enact. And that high bar for a national emergency wasn't always there. It was actually a critical safeguard added after some major controversies in the past.
Now, the timelines for approval, they tell a really interesting story all on their own. A national emergency has to be approved by Parliament within just 1 month. 1 month. That reflects its extreme urgency. The other two, though, they get a longer leash, 2 months. You can really see the constitutional design choice here. The bigger the power, the faster the required oversight.
And this slide just brilliantly shows the differences in how long they can stick around. A national emergency? It's like a really high-stakes subscription. It has to be renewed with that special majority every 6 months. President's Rule also needs a renewal every 6 months, but it's got a 3-year cap. But a financial emergency, wow. Once that's approved, it just keeps going, indefinitely with no need for renewal. Okay, but here's where it all really hits home for every single citizen. What happens to your fundamental rights? This is where the Constitution has to walk this incredibly fine line between the security of the state and the liberty of the individual.
So the Constitution has two very different ways of handling this. Under Article 358, the second a national emergency is declared for war or external aggression, poof. Your rights under Article 19, we're talking freedom of speech, assembly, all that are automatically suspended. But for your other rights, Article 359 requires a specific presidential order. And even then, some rights are completely untouchable.
Yeah, and thankfully, some really critical safeguards were put in place over time. The landmark 44th Amendment made it super clear that rights are only automatically suspended during an external war. And even more importantly, it built a firewall around 2 articles, making them impossible to suspend ever. That's Article 20, which protects you from unjust conviction, and Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty. This basically ensures a baseline of human dignity stays intact, no matter how bad the crisis gets.
So, these extraordinary powers, they were definitely not designed to be used lightly. And their history is, well, it's a dramatic story of use, very controversial misuse, and the constitutional pushback that came after.
A national emergency, the most powerful of the three, has only been used just 3 times in India's entire history. And one of those times, back in 1975, proved to be so controversial that it directly led to some of the major constitutional changes we've been talking about. But in stark contrast, look at this. President's Rule has been used over 135 times. Now, that frequent use has, as you can imagine, sparked some really intense debate about whether it's been used as a political tool instead of a true constitutional necessity.
And then there's this number, which is pretty remarkable. A financial emergency has never, not once, been declared. Despite facing some pretty serious economic crises over the decades, India has always managed to handle its finances without ever having to pull this ultimate economic lever. You see, this whole history is like a constant tug of war between expanding executive power and then trying to rein it back in. The 38th Amendment tried to make an emergency declaration totally immune from any court challenges, but then the 44th Amendment came along and reversed that, adding all those crucial safeguards. And then you have landmark Supreme Court cases like Minerva Mills and S.R. Bammai that firmly establish that, yes, even these extraordinary powers can be reviewed by the courts.
The S.R. Bammai case in particular was an absolute earthquake for president's rule. The Supreme Court essentially created a rule book, drawing clear red lines. It said you can't just dismiss a state government for things like corruption or to solve the ruling party's own internal drama. You absolutely have to test a government's majority on the floor of the House first. This one judgment put powerful new checks on the arbitrary use of Article 356.
And all of this brings us to the final, lingering question. These emergency provisions, they're a constitutional safety valve, right? They're designed to protect the whole nation from collapse. But they also put immense power in the hands of a few and carry this huge risk of misuse. So, with all the safeguards that have been added over the years, has the Constitution finally struck the right balance? Well, that's a question India continues to grapple with every single day.